This is Jake, and he has a story that still haunts him whenever he thinks about it. It happened when he was in middle school, Jake says, during physical education class. The locker room at our school was old, and honestly, it was creepy. The mirrors on the walls were scratched and dark, like they hadn't been cleaned properly in years. But we didn't care. It was just the locker room. One day, after a particularly tough workout, I stayed behind to get my stuff while everyone else went out. I was alone, and the locker room was eerily quiet. I walked over to the sink to wash my face, glancing in the mirror out of habit. That's when I saw him. My reflection was regular, but there was something strange. In the background, behind me, someone was standing near the lockers. He was a boy, about my age, with dark hair and a pale face. But here's the thing. No one else was in the locker room. I was all alone. I turned around, expecting to see the boy, but the room was empty. My heart was racing as I turned back to the mirror. The boy was still there, but was now closer, standing right behind me. I couldn't breathe. I felt this chill creeping up my spine, like ice water poured down my back. I didn't know what to do, so I stood frozen, staring into the mirror. The boy's friend, he didn't believe me, and said it was probably just a trick of the light, but I knew what I saw. After that day, I avoided that mirror as much as possible, but now and then I would glimpse something in the corner of my eye, a shadow, a face, as I passed, and every time I felt the same cold, creeping dread. I graduated years ago, but I still have nightmares about that mirror. This is Emily, and this is the scariest thing that has ever happened to her in school. Emily says, "It was my first year in middle school, and everything seemed normal until a new student joined our class. Her name was Lucy. She was quiet, always sitting in the back of the room, never talking to anyone, never turning around and never blinking. I didn't think much of it. Some kids are just shy. But there was something strange about her, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. One day, as we sat in class, our teacher, Mr. Harris, asked Lucy to come to the front of the room to present her project. She just sat there, staring blankly at him, as if she hadn't heard him. Mr. Harris asked again, but Lucy didn't move or even blink. The whole room was silent, waiting for her to respond. At that, Mr. Harris turned pale. He looked around the room, his eyes wide, as if searching for something. Then he mumbled, "It's okay," and moved on to the next student. At lunch, I asked my friend Kate if she had noticed anything strange about Lucy. I said, "Don't you think it's strange that she didn't answer the teacher or say anything in class? She's been quiet all day." Kate looked puzzled and asked, "Who is Lucy?" I thought she was joking, but when I tried to point to Lucy, she didn't see anyone sitting in the back of the room. I was terrified. How hadn't she seen her? I decided to confront Mr. Harris after class. When I asked him about Lucy, his face turned white. He told me that there was no student named Lucy in our class. I argued with him, but he insisted. He even showed me the class roster, and Lucy's name wasn't there. But who was sitting in the back of the room, I wondered. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Lucy, how she always sat alone, and how no one else noticed her except me. The next day, when I went to class, Lucy was gone. Her desk was empty, and no one, not even Mr. Harris, had mentioned her absence. Weeks passed, and I tried to forget about it, convincing myself I might have imagined it all. But one day, I found something strange in my locker, a piece of paper with Lucy's name written on it repeatedly, in neat, tiny handwriting. My heart nearly stopped. To this day, I have no idea who or what Lucy was, but I'll never forget how Mr. Harris looked when I asked him about her. or that no one else seemed to remember the girl. Sitting in the back of the class, some things are better left unexplained. This is Sarah. This happened to her during her first year of middle school, and to this day she can't explain what happened. Sarah says, "It was a typical Wednesday afternoon, just another boring math class. Our teacher, Mrs. Reynolds, was talking about algebra when she noticed something strange. An empty desk was in the corner of the room, right next to the window. What caught my attention wasn't the desk itself, but the fact that it had a stack of books and a notebook, arranged neatly as if someone had been sitting on it. You might think that's not strange, but here's the thing. No one had ever sat there before. This desk had been empty all year, an informal storage space, where Mrs. Reynolds kept her papers and extra supplies. During class, I couldn't take my eyes off the desk. It felt like something, or someone, was sitting there, even though I couldn't see it. Then, suddenly, the air around me became colder. I shivered and tried to focus on the lesson, but it was impossible. The cold seemed to seep into my bones, and I felt this overwhelming sense of unease. After class, I mentioned the office to my friend Lily. She looked at me like I was crazy and said she hadn't noticed anything strange. I decided to leave it, thinking it might have been my imagination. But the feeling persisted, and every time I walked into that classroom, I felt this presence through the window. One day, after school, I stayed to work on a project. The classroom was empty, and it was just me and Mrs. Reynolds. I gathered my things ready to leave when I heard a faint scratching sound, like someone writing on paper. The sound was coming from the direction of the empty desk. I froze, my heart pounding. Slowly I turned to look at the desk. The books and notebook were still there, but were now open. The page was covered in writing, as if someone had been frantically jotting down notes. Mrs. Reynolds approached, noticing my panic. I pointed to the notebook, but the page was blank when I looked. My blood ran cold as I realized that I didn't want anyone else to know whatever it was. I never told anyone what happened that day, but from that moment on, I avoided that corner of the classroom. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting for me to return. To this day, I wonder who or what was sitting at that desk and what they wanted from me.